The October sun hung merciless over the New Mexico territory, baking the earth until it cracked like broken promises. Marcus Brennan rode his buckskin mare with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had learned that rushing only brought trouble. The wind carried dust and the faint scent of distant smoke, but nothing else stirred in the vast expanse of sage and scattered pine. He had been tracking his missing cattle for 3 days now, following hoofprints that led deeper into Apache territory than any sensible rancher should venture. But Marcus had never been accused of being sensible, especially when it came to protecting what was his. The Double B Ranch sat on the edge of civilization, where the law was whatever a man could enforce with his rifle and his word. The mare's ears pricked forward suddenly, and Marcus reined her to a halt. There, perhaps 50 yards ahead, a figure moved through the scrub brush with the unsteady gait of someone who had been walking too long without water. He squinted against the glare, making out the silhouette of a young woman, her long black hair catching the light like polished obsidian. She wore a simple deerskin dress, torn at the hem and stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood. In her right hand, she clutched a single eagle feather, its white tip stark against her brown fingers. She stumbled, caught herself, then continued forward with the determined shuffle of someone who refused to give up, even when surrender would be easier. Marcus dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a soft thud. The woman had not noticed him yet, lost in whatever private battle kept her moving. He could see now that she was young, maybe 18 or 19, with the high cheekbones and strong jaw that marked her as Apache. Her dress hung loose on her thin frame, and her lips were cracked from thirst. When she finally looked up and saw him, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her dark eyes went wide with fear, then narrowed with defiance. She raised the feather like a weapon, though they both knew it would be useless against the Winchester rifle slung across his shoulder. "Easy there," Marcus said, his voice carrying the rough gentleness he used with spooked horses. "I am not here to hurt you." She said nothing, just stood there swaying slightly in the heat. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and he could see the exhaustion carved into every line of her body. Whatever had brought her to this desolate place, she was at the end of her rope. Marcus reached slowly for his canteen, making no sudden movements. The woman watched him with the intensity of a wild animal deciding whether to fight or flee. When he held out the water, she stared at it for a long moment before taking a hesitant step forward. "Go on," he said softly. "You look like you could use it." She snatched the canteen from his hand and drank deeply, water spilling down her chin and onto her dress. When she finally lowered it, her eyes met his again, and some of the wildness had gone out of them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like sand across stone. Marcus nodded toward the feather still clutched in her other hand. "That is a fine feather. Eagle." She looked down at it, as if surprised to find it there. "My father gave it to me. He said it would guide me home." "Where is home?" Her face clouded over, and she turned away. "There is no home. They burned it, killed everyone." Her voice was flat, matter of fact, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath. He had heard stories, of course. Raids and counter-raids, settlers and Apaches locked in a cycle of violence that seemed to have no end. But standing here, looking at this broken girl with her sacred feather and her hollow eyes, the stories took on a different weight. "What is your name?" he asked. She was quiet for so long that he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "I had a name once, but the people who knew it are dead." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He had lost his own family years ago, his wife and infant son to a fever that swept through the territory like wildfire. He knew what it was like to be the only one left carrying memories that no one else would ever share. "Well," he said, "everyone needs a name. How about we find you one?" She looked at him with suspicion. "Why would you help me?" It was a fair question. Out here, Apache and white settler were supposed to be enemies. The newspapers back east were full of stories about savage raids and brave cavalry charges. But all Marcus saw was a young woman who had lost everything and was still somehow standing. "Because," he said simply, "it is the right thing to do." The woman studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth written there. Finally, she nodded once, a small gesture that seemed to take all her remaining strength. "I am called Ayana now," she said. "It means eternal blossom in my language." "Ayana," Marcus repeated, tasting the unfamiliar syllables. "That is a good name." I am Marcus Brennan." She did not offer her hand, but she did not back away either when he stepped closer. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that matched the canyon walls in the distance. "My ranch is not far," Marcus said. "You can rest there, get some food, decide what you want to do next." Ayana's grip tightened on the eagle feather. "Your people will not want me there." "It is just me," Marcus said. "Has been for 3 years now." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded again. Marcus helped her up onto his mare, noting how light she felt, like a bird with hollow bones. He walked alongside, leading the horse by the reins as they made their way across the desert toward the cluster of buildings that made up the Double B Ranch. The ranch house was modest, built from adobe and timber, with a wide porch that faced east toward the rising sun. A weathered barn stood nearby, along with a small corral where 2 horses dozed in the shade. It was not much, but it was home, and Marcus felt a familiar sense of pride as they approached. He helped Ayana down from the horse and led her inside. The front room was simply furnished with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table and 2 chairs. Shelves lined one wall, holding books and the few personal items Marcus had salvaged from his old life. "Sit," he said, pulling out one of the chairs. "I will get you something to eat." Ayana sank into the chair with obvious relief, still clutching the eagle feather. Marcus moved to the kitchen area and began preparing a simple meal of beans and cornbread, stealing glances at his unexpected guest as he worked. She was beautiful, he realized, despite the dirt and exhaustion. Her face had the kind of classical features that artists tried to capture in marble, all clean lines and perfect proportions. But it was her eyes that drew him, dark and deep as mountain pools, holding secrets he could only guess at. When the food was ready, Marcus set a plate before her and took the chair across the table. Ayana ate slowly, as if afraid the food might disappear if she moved too quickly. The only sound was the soft scrape of spoon against bowl and the distant lowing of cattle in the pasture. "How did you end up out there?" Marcus asked when she had finished eating. Ayana set down her spoon and was quiet for a moment, her fingers turning the eagle feather over and over. "The soldiers came to our village 3 moons ago," she said finally. "They said we were harboring renegades, that we had stolen horses and cattle. It was not true, but they did not care about truth." Her voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tremor in her hands. "They burned the teepees, killed the men, took the women and children to the reservation. I hid in a cave until they were gone. Then I started walking." "Where were you trying to go?" "Anywhere but there." She looked up at him, and he saw a flash of the steel that had kept her alive. "I would rather die free than live as a prisoner." Marcus nodded. He understood that sentiment, had felt it himself in the dark days after his family died. "You are safe here," he said, "for as long as you want to stay." Ayana's eyes searched his face. "Why do you trust me? I could be a spy, sent to learn your weaknesses." Marcus smiled, the first real smile he had worn in months. "Could be, but you would be a mighty poor spy, collapsing from thirst in the middle of nowhere." To his surprise, Ayana smiled too, a small quirk of her lips that transformed her entire face. "That is true. I am not very good at being sneaky." "Well then," Marcus said, "I guess we will have to work on that." The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Marcus went about his ranch work, checking on the cattle and mending fences, while Ayana rested and regained her strength. She helped where she could, proving surprisingly knowledgeable about horses and livestock. She had gentle hands and a quiet way of moving that the animals responded to. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the desert. Marcus would tell her stories about the ranch, about the cattle drives and the long winters when the snow piled up to the windowsills. Ayana listened with the intensity of someone storing up memories against a future that might hold no such peaceful moments. Sometimes she would talk about her own life, her childhood in the Apache camps, the stories her grandmother had told about the old days when her people roamed free across the Southwest. Her voice would grow soft and distant, as if she were speaking of a dream she had once had. "My father was a great warrior," she said one evening, the eagle feather resting in her lap. "He fought in many battles, counted coup on his enemies, but he was also wise. He knew that the old ways were ending, that we would have to learn new ways to survive. What would he think of you being here? Marcus asked. Ayanna was quiet for a moment. He would say that survival is more important than pride, that a wise person learns from their enemies as well as their friends. Is that what I am? Your enemy? She turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. I do not know what you are, Marcus Brennan, but I know you are not my enemy. It was during the second week of her stay that the trouble started. Marcus was in the barn, brushing down his mare when he heard the sound of approaching horses. He stepped to the door and saw 3 riders coming up the trail, dust clouds marking their passage across the desert. Marcus recognized them immediately. Sheriff Tom Garrett and 2 of his deputies, Jim Crawford and Billy Moss. They were good men, as far as lawmen went, but they had a job to do, and that job did not always align with what Marcus considered right. "Afternoon, Marcus," Garrett called as he reined in his horse. He was a lean man, with graying hair, and the kind of weathered face that came from spending most of his life outdoors. "Mind if we water our horses?" "Help yourself," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice casual. "What brings you out this way?" Garrett dismounted and led his horse to the trough. "Looking for someone. Apache girl, maybe 18 years old. Word is she escaped from a group being taken to the reservation." Marcus felt his stomach tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's so. What did she do?" "Killed a soldier," Crawford said, speaking up from where he still sat his horse. "Cut his throat while he slept." "Now, Jim," Garrett said mildly, "we do not know that for certain. Could have been anyone in that camp." "Apache girl goes missing the same night a soldier gets killed," Crawford insisted. "Does not take a genius to figure it out." Marcus glanced toward the house, but the windows were dark. He hoped Ayanna had heard the horses and had the sense to stay hidden. "I have not seen anyone," he said. "Just me and the cattle out here." Garrett nodded, but his eyes were sharp as they scanned the ranch buildings. "Mind if we take a look around? Just to be thorough." It was not really a request, and they all knew it. Marcus stepped aside as the 3 men dismounted and began searching the barn, then moved on to the house. Marcus followed, his heart pounding as they went from room to room. The house was empty. "Well," Garrett said, settling his hat back on his head, "looks like she is not here. But Marcus, if you do see her, you need to let us know. This is not some runaway we are talking about. If she killed that soldier, she is dangerous." "I understand," Marcus said. After the lawmen left, Marcus waited until their dust had disappeared over the horizon before calling out, "Ayanna, they are gone." She emerged from behind the woodpile where she had been hiding, her face pale but composed. "I heard what they said, about the soldier." Marcus studied her face. "Did you kill him?" Ayanna met his gaze without flinching. "He tried to force himself on me. I defended myself." Marcus felt a cold anger settle in his chest. He had heard stories about what happened to Indian women in the custody of some soldiers, stories that made his blood boil. "Good," he said simply. Ayanna looked surprised. "You are not afraid of me?" "Should I be?" She shook her head. "I am not a killer, Marcus. I am just someone who refuses to be a victim." "Then we understand each other," Marcus said. That night, they sat by the fire in the front room, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Ayanna held her eagle feather up to the light, studying its intricate patterns. "My father told me that eagle feathers hold the prayers of our people," she said. "Each marking, each barb, carries a wish for protection or guidance." "What does yours carry?" Marcus asked. "Hope," she said simply. "Hope that somewhere, somehow, I would find a place where I could belong again." Marcus looked at her across the fire, this woman who had wandered into his life carrying nothing but a feather and a broken heart. "Maybe you already have," he said quietly. Their eyes met and held, and in that moment, something shifted between them. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might grow into love, given time and care. Outside, the desert wind howled across the empty spaces, carrying with it the scent of rain that might never come. But inside the little adobe house, 2 lonely souls had found something worth holding on to, something that might just be enough to build a future on. The feather caught the firelight, its white tip glowing like a star against the darkness. And for the first time since she had started walking, Ayanna felt like she might finally be home. The weeks that followed brought an uneasy peace to the Double B Ranch. Marcus and Ayana fell into a routine that felt both natural and fragile, like walking on ice that might crack at any moment. She helped with the morning chores, her movements graceful and efficient as she fed the chickens and gathered eggs. Marcus taught her to read English, using his collection of books and old newspapers, while she showed him Apache ways of tracking and reading the weather in cloud formations. Their conversations grew deeper as the autumn days shortened. Ayana spoke of her childhood, of learning to weave baskets from her grandmother, and listening to the old stories around the fire. Marcus shared memories of his wife Sarah, how she had loved to plant wildflowers around the house and sing while she cooked. "You still love her," Ayana observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the first stars appear. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I always will. But love is not a finite thing. The heart can hold more than one person." Ayana turned to look at him, her dark eyes searching his face in the twilight. "Is that what this is? What we are becoming?" Marcus reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her smooth skin. "I think it might be." The kiss that followed was soft and tentative, both of them afraid to break the spell of the moment. When they parted, Ayana rested her forehead against his, the eagle feather still clutched in her free hand. "I never thought I would feel safe again," she whispered. "You are safe with me," Marcus promised. "Always." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they might not be true. The world beyond the ranch was still hostile, still dangerous for an Apache woman and the white man who harbored her. They were living on borrowed time, and they both knew it. The reminder came 3 days later in the form of smoke on the horizon. Marcus spotted it from the ridge where he had been checking the fence line, a thin column of black rising from the direction of the Hendricks place. He rode hard back to the ranch, his mare's hooves pounding against the hard earth. "Pack what you can carry," he told Ayana as he burst through the front door. "We need to leave, now." Ayana was already moving, gathering her few possessions into a cloth bundle. What happened? Smoke from the Hendricks ranch. Could be raiders, could be the army. Either way, they will come here next. They saddled 2 horses and loaded supplies with practiced efficiency. Marcus grabbed his rifle and ammunition, while Ayana secured her eagle feather inside her dress, close to her heart. As they prepared to ride out, Marcus took one last look at the little adobe house that had been his home for 3 years. "I am sorry," Ayana said, following his gaze. "This is my fault." Marcus turned to her, his blue eyes fierce. "No. This is the fault of men who cannot see past the color of skin to the person underneath. You have nothing to apologize for." They rode south, toward the border and the hope of freedom beyond. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but Marcus knew these lands better than most. He led them through hidden canyons and forgotten trails, always keeping to high ground where they could see anyone following. On the second day they found the soldiers. Marcus spotted the dust cloud first, then the glint of sunlight off metal. A cavalry patrol, at least a dozen men, riding hard in their direction. He pulled Ayana into the shelter of a rocky outcrop, and they watched as the blue uniformed figures passed below them. "They are tracking us," Ayana said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded grimly. The patrol was following their trail with the persistence of bloodhounds. Someone in that group was a skilled tracker, probably an Apache scout pressed into service by the army. "We need to split up," Marcus said. "You take the mare and head for the border. I will lead them away." Ayana grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "No, we stay together." "Ayana, be reasonable. They want you, not me. If we separate, you have a chance. And what chance do you have alone against 12 soldiers?" Her dark eyes flashed with anger and fear. "We survive together or not at all." Marcus looked at her, this woman who had walked out of the desert with nothing but a feather and a broken heart, and saw the strength that had kept her alive when everything else was taken from her. He nodded slowly. "Together, then." They rode hard through the afternoon, pushing their horses to the limit. The soldiers stayed behind them, close enough to keep them moving, but far enough back to avoid an ambush. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse across the brutal landscape of the high desert. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Marcus led them into a narrow canyon he remembered from his younger days. The walls rose high on either side, offering shelter but also trapping them if the soldiers caught up. At the far end, he knew, was a hidden spring, and an old Apache camp that might offer sanctuary, but they never made it that far. The gunshot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder, and Marcus felt the bullet tear through his shoulder. He tumbled from his horse, hitting the rocky ground hard as Ayanna screamed his name. Blood soaked through his shirt as he struggled to get to his feet, his rifle lying just out of reach. "Well, well," a familiar voice drawled, "if it is not Marcus Brennan and his pet Apache." Deputy Jim Crawford stepped out from behind a boulder, his smoking pistol trained on Marcus. Behind him came 3 more soldiers, their weapons ready. They had been waiting, had somehow gotten ahead of the main patrol and set up an ambush. "Jim," Marcus gasped, pressing his hand to his wounded shoulder. "What are you doing?" Crawford spat into the dust. "My job. This girl is wanted for murder, and you are harboring a fugitive. That makes you a criminal, too." Ayanna slid down from her horse, her hands raised but her chin lifted defiantly. "I am here. Let him go." "I do not think so, sweetheart." Crawford's smile was cold and ugly. "You killed one of our boys. That requires justice." "What kind of justice?" Marcus demanded, struggling to his feet. "A trial? Or are you planning to be judge and jury out here?" "The kind that sends a message," one of the soldiers said, stepping forward. Sergeant Hayes, Marcus realized, a man with a reputation for brutality that extended well beyond the battlefield. "No trial needed for a savage and a traitor," Hayes continued. "We can settle this right here." Marcus saw the intent in their eyes, the hunger for violence that had nothing to do with justice. These men had come here to kill, and they would not be satisfied with anything less. "Run," he whispered to Ayanna. But she was already moving, not away, but toward him. The eagle feather appeared in her hand, as if by magic, its white tip catching the last light of day. She held it between them like a shield, her voice rising in a chant Marcus did not understand, but felt in his bones. The soldiers laughed, but their laughter had a nervous edge to it. There was something in Ayanna's voice, something in the way she held herself, that spoke of powers older than their guns and uniforms. "Enough of this nonsense," Crawford snarled, raising his pistol. The shot rang out across the canyon, but it was not Crawford who fell. One of the soldiers behind him dropped his rifle and clutched his chest, blood spreading across his blue uniform. From the rocks above came the war cries of Apache warriors, their painted faces fierce in the dying light. The ambush became chaos in seconds. Soldiers dove for cover as arrows whistled down from the canyon walls. Crawford's pistol barked twice more before an arrow sprouted from his throat, cutting off his cry mid-scream. Marcus grabbed Ayanna and pulled her behind a fallen boulder as the battle raged around them. The Apache warriors were like ghosts, appearing and disappearing among the rocks, their weapons finding their marks with deadly precision. It was over almost as quickly as it had begun. The canyon fell silent, except for the echo of gunshots fading into the distance. Marcus peered over the boulder and saw bodies scattered across the rocky ground, blue uniforms stained with blood and dust. A figure appeared at the edge of their hiding place, and Ayanna gasped. It was an Apache warrior, tall and lean with graying hair braided with feathers. His face was painted for war, but his dark eyes were gentle as they looked at the young woman. "Grandfather," Ayanna whispered, and Marcus understood. Not her literal grandfather, but a leader, a man of respect in her tribe. The warrior spoke in rapid Apache, and Ayanna responded, her voice trembling with emotion. Marcus caught enough words to understand that this was Yellow Hawk, a chief who had refused to surrender to the reservation system. His band of followers lived free in the mountains, raiding when necessary, hiding when prudent. Yellow Hawk turned to Marcus, studying him with calculating eyes. When he spoke, it was in heavily accented English. "You protect our daughter." "Why?" Marcus struggled to his feet, still pressing his hand to his wounded shoulder. "Because it was right." The chief nodded slowly. "Good answer, but not complete. Why do you really protect her?" Marcus looked at Ayanna, saw the hope and fear warring in her dark eyes. "Because I love her." Yellow Hawk was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Also good answer. Come. We tend your wound, then we talk." The Apache camp was hidden in a box canyon deeper in the mountains, invisible from the air, and accessible only through a narrow passage that could be easily defended. It was larger than Marcus had expected. perhaps 40 people living in traditional wickiups covered with brush and hides. As the medicine woman worked on his shoulder, cleaning and binding the wound with herbs that burned like fire but seemed to draw out the pain, Marcus watched Ayanna reunite with her people. She was crying openly now, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face as old women embraced her and children gathered around to touch her hands. But even in her happiness, her eyes kept finding his, as if she were afraid he might disappear if she looked away too long. That evening, as the camp settled down for the night, Yellow Hawk approached the fire where Marcus sat alone, his arm in a sling made from soft deerskin. "My warriors tell me you fought beside her," the chief said, settling down on a nearby rock. "She fought beside me," Marcus corrected. "That woman has more courage than 10 men. Yellow Hawk nodded approvingly. "Her father was my nephew. Good man, strong warrior. She has his spirit." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance against the darkness. Finally, Yellow Hawk spoke again. "You cannot stay here. Neither can she." Marcus felt his heart sink, though he had known this moment would come. "I understand." "No, I do not think you do." The chief's weathered face was serious in the firelight. "She is Apache, but she has chosen to walk between 2 worlds. That is a difficult path, full of danger and sorrow. But sometimes, it is the only path that leads to peace." "What are you saying?" "There is a place, far south in Mexico, where Apache and Mexican and white man sometimes live together in peace. Not many such places, but a few. A man with strong hands and a good heart could build a life there, especially if he had a wise woman beside him." Marcus looked across the fire and saw Ayanna approaching, the eagle feather once again in her hand. She sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. "Grandfather has told me about the settlement in Sonora," she said quietly. "It is dangerous to get there, but no more dangerous than staying here." "Is that what you want?" Marcus asked. "To leave your people again?" Ayanna lifted the eagle feather, turning it so that the firelight caught its intricate patterns. "My father gave me this when I was young. He said it would guide me home. I thought home was a place, a village, a people, but I was wrong." She turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the flames. "Home is not where you come from. It is where you choose to belong. And I choose to belong with you, Marcus Brennan, wherever that may be." Marcus felt something break open in his chest, a warmth that spread through his body like whiskey on a cold night. He reached up and cupped her face in his good hand, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Then we go south," he said simply. Yellow Hawk smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. "Good. I will give you horses, supplies, and 2 of my best warriors to guide you to the border. After that, you are on your own." 3 days later, Marcus and Ayanna stood at the edge of the Apache camp, their horses loaded with provisions for the long journey ahead. The entire tribe had gathered to see them off, and the air was heavy with emotion and unspoken farewells. Yellow Hawk approached them one last time, carrying something wrapped in soft leather. He handed it to Ayanna, who unwrapped it carefully to reveal a beautiful silver bracelet, inlaid with turquoise and carved with symbols Marcus did not recognize. "It belonged to your grandmother," the chief said. "She would want you to have it." Ayanna fastened the bracelet around her wrist, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "Thank you, grandfather, for everything. Take care of each other," he replied. "The world is hard, but love makes it bearable." They rode out of the canyon as the sun climbed toward its zenith, their Apache guides leading them along trails that existed only in memory and legend. Behind them, the camp disappeared into the rocks and shadows, as if it had never been. The journey south took 2 weeks, through desert and mountain, across rivers swollen with autumn rain and valleys where the wind howled like lost souls. They traveled mostly at night, sleeping during the heat of the day in whatever shelter they could find. Their guides left them at the Rio Grande, pointing the way toward the settlement in Sonora, before melting back into the landscape like mirages. Marcus and Ayanna crossed the river alone, their horses struggling against the current, water swirling around them like liquid silver in the moonlight. On the far side, they stopped to rest and let their clothes dry. Ayanna sat on a fallen log, combing her long hair with her fingers while Marcus checked their supplies. The eagle feather lay beside her, its white tip gleaming in the starlight. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Leaving everything behind?" Marcus looked at her. This woman who had walked into his life carrying nothing but hope and heartbreak, and felt the truth settle in his chest like a stone finding the bottom of a clear stream. "Never," he said. "You are my everything now." She smiled, the expression radiant in the darkness. "And you are mine." The settlement of Esperanza sat in a green valley surrounded by low hills, its adobe buildings golden in the afternoon sun. It was small, maybe 50 families, but Marcus could see immediately that Yellow Hawk had been right. Mexican farmers worked alongside Apache families, their children playing together in the dusty streets, while white traders hawked their wares in the central plaza. It was not perfect, this mixing of cultures and peoples. There were tensions, disagreements, the inevitable friction that came when different worlds collided. But there was also something else, something Marcus had never seen before: acceptance. They found lodging in a small inn run by a Mexican woman named Elena, who took one look at Ayana's Apache features and Marcus's white skin and simply smiled. "Love is love," she said in accented English. "The heart knows no borders." That evening, as they sat in the inn's courtyard sharing a simple meal of beans and tortillas, Ayana pulled out her eagle feather one last time. She held it up to the lamplight, studying its familiar patterns. "My father was right," she said softly. "It did guide me home." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "We are home now?" "Yes," she said, and her smile was brighter than all the stars in the desert sky. "We are home." 2 years later, Marcus Brennan stood in the doorway of their small adobe house, watching his wife tend to their garden. Ayana knelt among the rows of corn and beans, her belly round with their first child, the silver bracelet from her grandmother catching the morning light. The eagle feather hung in a place of honor above their bed, but it was no longer a symbol of wandering or loss. It had become something else entirely, a reminder that sometimes the longest journeys lead to the most unexpected destinations, and that love, true love, could bloom even in the harshest desert if it was given room to grow. In the distance, church bells chimed the hour, calling the people of Esperanza to Sunday Mass. Mexican, Apache, and white voices would join together in prayer, their differences set aside in service to something greater than themselves. And in their little house at the edge of town, Marcus and Ayana Brennan prepared to welcome another soul into the world, another child who would grow up knowing that home was not a place on a map, but a feeling in the heart, built from love and watered with hope. The Apache girl who had wandered the desert with nothing but a feather and no name had found both. More than that, she had found a love that transcended the barriers men built between themselves, a love that proved the human heart knew no boundaries save those it chose to accept. And under the endless sky of the American Southwest, their story continued, written not in the history books, but in the quiet moments of daily life, in the laughter of children and the whispered promises of lovers, in the simple truth that sometimes the greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but in the brave decision to choose love over fear, hope over hatred, tomorrow over yesterday. If this story of forbidden love and second chances moved your heart, if it reminded you that even in the darkest times, love can light the way home, then you have found the right place. Subscribe for more tales of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all, no matter the color of our skin or the gods we worship. Every story is crafted to remind you that love, true love, knows no borders and recognizes no enemies save those we create in our own hearts.